The violet canopy of Aurelis stretched endlessly above, as Lieutenant Commander Ryan Blackwood regained consciousness. His emergency pod had torn through layers of luminescent foliage before coming to rest in a small clearing. The impact had knocked him unconscious, but the pod systems had already analyzed the surrounding environment. Breathable atmosphere, manageable gravity, no immediate toxins. Small mercies. Ryan ran a hand through his dark hair, wincing as his fingers encountered a gash at his temple. The escape pod's medical kit would have to suffice until rescue arrived, if rescue arrived. The Horizon's distress beacon had activated before the research vessel was attacked, but there was no guarantee anyone would respond in time. Outside, the bioluminescent forest pulsed with life. Emerald vines snaked between amethyst tree trunks, and a golden amber sky filtered through the dense foliage. It was beautiful, but Ryan knew better than to be seduced by alien beauty. 20 years in the Earth. Alliance's Exploration Division had taught him that lesson the hard way. He checked his equipment: survival knife ration packs, portable shelter, and a small blaster standard issue, though he preferred to avoid using weapons when possible. His communications device was damaged, but operational enough to maintain a local frequency. The emergency transmitter was functioning, sending its faint signal into space, calling for help that might never come. High above, in the tallest trees hidden among glowing fronds, Neri observed the intruder. Her orange skin, adorned with sacred patterns, painted in bioluminescent pigments, blended perfectly with the amber light. Platinum hair fell in intricate braids around her face as she narrowed her eyes at the foreign object that had scarred her forest home. Outsiders always bring calamity. She whispered to herself, a mantra passed down through generations of forest guardians. Her people, the Aurelians, had maintained their isolation for centuries, allowing only limited contact with the interstellar community. Encounters with off-worlders rarely ended well. Neri adjusted her position, careful not to disturb the branches. As a guardian of this sector, it was her duty to observe and report to the Elders' Council. Intervention was forbidden without their explicit approval. Still, curiosity compelled her to watch as the human began establishing a temporary camp. Ryan worked methodically, setting up thermal barriers and securing his supplies. Night was approaching, bringing unknown dangers. He'd been briefed on Aurelis during the mission orientation, a vibrant ecosystem with indigenous sentient life that remained largely mysterious to the scientific community. The Alliance's research mission was supposed to be purely observational, minimizing contact with locals. Now, stranded alone, Ryan knew that maintaining protocol would be challenging. As twilight descended, the forest transformed. Plants that had been merely colorful during daylight now emitted an ethereal glow, painting the undergrowth in shades of azure, violet, and gold. The beauty was almost distracting enough to make Ryan miss the sound of approaching footsteps almost. He tensed, hand moving instinctively toward his blaster. The rustling grew closer, accompanied by a high-pitched yowl that sounded more curious than threatening. Ryan slowly reached for the portable light on his belt, activating it, just as a smaller creature burst through the undergrowth. The juvenile predator froze in the light. Its 6 limbs were poised to pounce iridescent scales, shifting colors from deep blue to alarmed red. 2 sets of eyes, one pair above the other, blinked at Ryan, while a ridge of bioluminescent spines along its back flared in warning. Despite its youth, the creature radiated danger. In the treetops, Neri's breath caught. A young ferocious had wandered into the outsiders' camp, a deadly encounter for either party. Ferocious creatures were apex predators revered and feared by her people as embodiments of the forest's wrath. None would dare approach them, let alone a young one whose mother would certainly be nearby. Ryan recognized the creature from his briefings, a juvenile specimen of the planet's dominant predator species. The Alliance database had limited information, most warning of their territorial aggression and lethal hunting capabilities. Protocol dictated defensive measures, but something in the creature's posture, a mix of curiosity and fear, made Ryan reconsider. Instead of reaching for his weapon, he slowly lowered himself to one knee, placing his survival knife on the ground beside him. The young predator tilted its head spine still erect, but color shifting to a more neutral purple. "Hey there," Ryan said softly, keeping his voice even. "Just passing through. No need for trouble." He reached into his pack and removed a ration bar, breaking off a small piece and tossing it gently toward the creature. The young predator sniffed cautiously before snatching the food with surprising dexterity, using one of its smaller limbs. Neri watched in disbelief. No one approached the ferocious, certainly not with food offerings. The creatures were sacred, untouchable messengers of the forest spirits. Yet this outsider was not only alive, but seemingly communicating with the young hunter. The juvenile predator crept closer, still wary, but increasingly bold. Ryan remained still, occasionally offering another morsel, never making sudden movements. For nearly an hour, this cautious dance continued, until the young creature finally allowed Ryan to extend a hand toward its scaled head. Just as contact seemed imminent, a thunderous roar shook the clearing. The juvenile creature darted behind Ryan, as an adult version of the predator emerged from the darkness nearly twice Ryan's height, its scales shifting between aggressive crimson and midnight blue. The mother had arrived, and she did not appear pleased. Ryan froze painfully, aware that any sudden movement might trigger an attack. The adult ferocious advanced slowly, each step deliberate, its four front limbs tense to strike. Ryan's options were limited. Running would likely trigger a predatory response. Fighting was suicidal, and his pod offered minimal protection against such a creature. Instead, he followed the same instinct that had guided him earlier. He knelt, hands, open head slightly bowed, in a universal posture of non-aggression. The young ferocious peeked out from behind him, chirping what sounded like reassurance to its mother. "I mean no harm," Ryan spoke softly, knowing the creature couldn't understand his words, but might interpret his tone and body language. The adult ferocious approached cautiously, its massive head lowering to Ryan's level. Hot breath washed over him as the creature inhaled his scent. Ryan remained perfectly still, even as one of the creature's smaller limbs reached out to touch him. In the canopy above, Neri could scarcely believe what she was witnessing. The maternal ferocious was investigating the outsider, rather than tearing him apart. Such behavior was unprecedented, perhaps even prophetic. The ancient texts spoke of a time when the sacred hunters would recognize a worthy soul from beyond the stars. But these were tales for children, not reality. After what seemed like an eternity, the adult ferocious made a rumbling sound deep in its throat. The juvenile bounded forward, rubbing against its mother, before turning back to Ryan with what appeared to be excitement. The mother watched for a moment longer, then turned and disappeared into the undergrowth, her offspring following, after one last curious look at the human. Ryan exhaled slowly, his heart pounding. The encounter had been terrifying, but also exhilarating. Something profound had just occurred. He'd made first contact, not with the sentient species of this world, but with its apex predators, and survived to tell the tale. As night fully descended, Ryan reinforced his camp, but his mind kept returning to the encounter. There was intelligence in those creatures' eyes, a consideration that went beyond instinct. He made notes in his field journal, sketching the predators from memory and documenting their behaviors. Neri remained in her observation post long after she should have returned to her village. The outsider had done the impossible, touched the sacred realm of the ferocious, and emerged blessed rather than bloodied. Her duty was clear: report this anomaly to the council. Yet, something held her back. Such an encounter might be interpreted as an omen, potentially putting the stranger in danger from those who feared change. She decided to continue her surveillance. The outsider represented something new, perhaps a threat, perhaps an opportunity. Either way, understanding his purpose was paramount. Dawn broke with a cascade of color, as the forest's bioluminescence faded against the amber light of Aurelius's sun. Ryan woke early, checking his transmitter still functioning, still unanswered, before venturing a short distance from camp to collect water from a nearby stream. The water was crystal clear, its surface occasionally broken by small, luminescent creatures that resembled fish, but moved with the precision of insect swarms. Ryan's handheld analyzer confirmed it was safe for human consumption after basic filtration, a welcome discovery that significantly improved his survival prospects. As he filled his containers, Ryan sensed he was being watched. Not by the ferocious creatures, their presence had a different weight, a predatory tension that raised the hairs on his neck. This was something more calculated, more intentional. "I'm not here to cause harm," he called out, speaking to the forest at large. "My vessel was damaged. I'm just trying to survive until rescue arrives." No response came, but the feeling of observation intensified. Ryan continued his tasks, mapping the immediate area and identifying potential food sources. His rations would last 2 weeks at most. After that, he'd need to rely on local options. From her concealed position, Neri studied the human with growing fascination. Unlike previous outsiders who had visited Aurelis, this one moved with respect for the forest, taking only what he needed, disturbing little. His encounter with the ferocious remained unprecedented, but even more unusual was his apparent awareness of being watched. Most intriguing was his technology devices that analyzed and recorded weapons he chose not to use. The Aurelian elders taught that outsider technology was destructive by nature, yet this human seemed to employ it with restraint. As midday approached, Ryan returned to his camp to find unexpected visitors. The juvenile ferocious had returned, accompanied not by its mother, but by 2 similarly sized companions. The young predators prowled the perimeter of his camp, curiosity evident in their shifting colors and alert postures. Ryan approached slowly, repeating yesterday's ritual with offered food and calm words. The juveniles were more receptive this time, accepting his offerings and eventually allowing him to sit among them without showing signs of aggression. He used the opportunity to observe them more closely, noting the complex color patterns that seemed to serve as communication between the creatures. Their intelligence was evident. They tested boundaries, solved simple problems to access food, and maintained a social hierarchy that shifted based on subtle interactions. "You 3 need names," Ryan said, knowing full well he was anthropomorphizing, but finding comfort in the one-sided conversation. "Let's see. You with the blue dominant scales, you're azure. The greenish one is emerald. And you—" He addressed the original juvenile, who now displayed primarily golden scales. "You're amber." The creatures couldn't understand him, of course, but they responded to his tone, occasionally mimicking the cadence of his speech with their own vocalizations. Neri crept closer, mesmerized by the interaction. The naming of ferocious creatures was forbidden in her culture. They were beyond the realm of human familiarity, sacred beings to be revered from a distance. Yet, the calm communion between the human and the juvenile hunters challenged everything she had been taught. The peaceful scene was shattered by a distant, mechanical roar. The young, ferocious scattered instantly, disappearing into the undergrowth with alarming speed. Ryan tensed, recognizing the sound of engines, not Alliance vessels which used near-silent propulsion for scientific missions, but something more primitive and intrusive. He climbed a nearby ridge using the dense foliage for cover, and pulled out his field monocular. On the horizon, perhaps 5 kilometers distant, a crude mining vessel was descending through the atmosphere, belching smoke and flame as it approached. It bore no Alliance markings instead, displaying the infamous insignia of interstellar resource extractors, legal mercenaries, who exploited legislative loopholes to strip unprotected worlds of valuable materials. Ryan's jaw tightened. The Alliance had strict, non-interference policies regarding pre-spaceflight civilizations like the Aurelians, but that didn't stop private corporations from operating in gray areas, particularly with the nearest enforcement vessels potentially weeks away. The poachers' arrival complicated matters significantly. Not only would they damage the ecosystem with their extractive techniques, but they might also endanger the local population, including the fascinating predators Ryan had just begun to understand. As he watched the vessel descend, movement caught his eye, a flash of orange against the violet foliage. For a brief moment, Ryan glimpsed a humanoid figure, observing him from the canopy, platinum hair glinting in the dappled sunlight. Their eyes met and Ryan felt a jolt of recognition, not of the individual, but of the situation. He was being studied just as surely as he had been studying this world. The figure vanished almost instantly, leaving Ryan wondering if his isolation was affecting his perception. He returned to camp, newly cautious. His priorities had shifted. What had been a simple survival scenario was now a complex ethical dilemma. The Alliance directive of non-interference conflicted with his moral obligation to prevent harm to this ecosystem. He checked his equipment, particularly his emergency beacon. If he boosted the signal, it might reach an Alliance patrol sooner, but it would also be more likely to attract the poacher's attention. A calculated risk, but possibly worth taking. As night fell again, Ryan secured his camp and settled in to plan. The juvenile ferocious did not return, likely warned away by their mothers after the mechanical intrusion. He missed their presence more than expected, their alien companionship having provided unexpected comfort in his isolation. Sleep came fitfully interrupted by unfamiliar forest sounds and the weight of difficult decisions. Sometime in the darkest hours, Ryan woke suddenly, every sense alert. Something had changed in the forest's ambient noise, a new silence that suggested observant presence rather than absence. He reached slowly for his survival knife, keeping his movements minimal. "I know you're there," he said quietly. "I'm not looking for conflict." A moment of silence stretched between heartbeats. Then a voice answered from the darkness, musical and accented, but unmistakably speaking the interstellar common language. "Your kind always brings destruction, yet the sacred hunters accepted you. Explain." Ryan sat up slowly, eyes scanning the darkness for the source of the voice. "I respect life," he answered simply. "All forms of it. I'm Lieutenant Commander Ryan Blackwood, Earth Alliance Xenobiological Survey Division. My research vessel was attacked, and my escape pod landed here." A figure stepped from the shadows, the same orange-skinned being he'd glimpsed earlier. In the dim light of his camp, her features were clearer, humanoid, but distinctly alien, with large, expressive eyes containing vertically slitted pupils. Luminescent patterns adorned her skin, shifting subtly with her movements. "I am Neri, Guardian of the Eastern Groves. You trespass on sacred land." "Not by choice," Ryan assured her, keeping his hands visible. "I'm transmitting a distress signal. When my people find me, I'll leave your world peacefully." Neri approached, cautiously studying him with intense curiosity. "The others who came before they took minerals, plants, animals for study. They did not wait for permission." "Those weren't Alliance personnel," Ryan explained. "We have protocols for contact with non-spacefaring civilizations. Observation, only minimal interference." "Yet you fed the ferocious young. You touched what is sacred." Ryan considered his response carefully. "I didn't know they were sacred to your people. I just saw young creatures who were curious rather than threatening. It seemed right to respond in kind." Neri's expression was unreadable, but something in her posture suggested consideration rather than hostility. "The mining ship that descended, they are your people?" "No." Ryan's response was immediate and firm. "Resource extractors, poachers essentially. They exploit unprotected worlds for profit. I was watching them too." This seemed to surprise her. "You oppose their presence?" "Absolutely. They'll damage your ecosystem and possibly endanger your people. Alliance regulations forbid such operations, but enforcement is complicated in remote sectors." Neri was silent for a long moment, then gestured toward the forest. "Come, you should see what they do." It was a risk to follow this stranger into the alien forest at night, but Ryan's instincts told him this was an opening he couldn't afford to reject. He gathered essential equipment, light weapon, holstered as a sign of trust, and analyzer, and followed Neri into the luminescent darkness. They traveled in silence for nearly an hour, Neri moving with preternatural grace through the dense undergrowth, while Ryan struggled to keep pace without disturbing the environment. Eventually, they reached a ridge overlooking a valley where the mining vessel had landed. The scene below was one of efficient devastation. Mechanized extractors were already carving into the forest floor, their lights harsh against the natural bioluminescence. Security personnel patrolled the perimeter, heavily armed and alert for threats. "They hunt the ferocious," Neri explained, her voice tinged with controlled anger. "The scales fetch high prices in certain markets. Medicinal properties they claim, though such use is sacrilege." Ryan observed the operation with growing concern. The extractors weren't just mining, they were setting traps around the perimeter, clearly designed to capture rather than kill. Wounded prey was easier to process without damaging valuable scales. "How long have they been operating here?" he asked. "This is their third season," Neri replied. "Each time they take more, destroy more. The council debates while the forest suffers." "Your leaders don't oppose them." Neri's expression darkened. "Some believe resistance invites greater violence. Others favor limited trade. Few understand the true threat." Ryan recognized the dilemma it played out on countless developing worlds. Without unified resistance or outside intervention, exploiters operated with virtual impunity, often leaving only when resources were depleted. "My distress beacon might bring alliance enforcement," he offered. "They could remove the poachers legally." "How long until they arrive?" "Weeks, possibly. Depends on patrol patterns." Neri shook her head. "The sacred season begins in 7 days. The ferocious mothers will bring their young to the crystal pools for blessing. The hunters know this, they prepare for a great harvest." The implication was clear. Waiting for official intervention meant accepting devastating losses to the ecosystem and Aurelian culture. Ryan faced a choice between Alliance protocol and his own moral compass. Before he could respond, a pained roar echoed through the forest, followed by the distinctive whine of energy weapons. Neri tensed her luminescent markings, flaring with emotion. "They've trapped one," she whispered, already moving toward the sound. Ryan followed without hesitation. Protocol be damned, some principles transcended regulatory guidelines. They moved swiftly through the undergrowth, following the increasingly distressed sounds. In a small clearing, they found a horrific scene. An adult, ferocious, amber-scaled, and massive, caught in a mechanical trap that clamped cruelly around one limb. Blood pooled beneath it, glowing faintly in the bioluminescent light. Even more distressing was the realization that Ryan recognized this creature. The distinctive pattern of its scales matched the mother of Amber, the first juvenile he'd encountered. The predator thrashed against its restraint, weakening with each attempt. Neri stopped at the edge of the clearing, her expression torn between concern and deeply ingrained fear. "We cannot approach. The ferocious in pain will attack anything within reach." Ryan assessed the situation rapidly. The trap was mechanical rather than energy-based, primitive, but effective. Its control mechanism appeared to be a simple pressure release, accessible if one could get close enough without being mauled. "I need to try," he said, removing his pack and taking only his survival knife. "That trap will kill her if it's not released soon." "You will die," Neri stated, not unkindly, but with certainty. "Maybe. But we connected earlier, her offspring and I. There's a chance she'll remember." Ryan approached, slowly, making his presence known with soft words. The ferocious mother's head swung toward him, her scales shifting to warning colors, spine ridges fully extended. "Remember me," Ryan spoke calmly, maintaining eye contact with the upper set of the creature's eyes, a dominant signal he'd observed between the juveniles. "I mean no harm. I want to help." The predator growled a deep rumbling that vibrated through the clearing. Ryan continued his approach, moving laterally to stay away from the trapped limb, where pain might override any potential recognition. When he was within 5 meters, the ferocious lunged as far as her restraint, allowed jaws snapping less than a meter from Ryan's position. He held his ground, dropping to one knee in the same posture he'd adopted during their first encounter. "I'm going to help you," he continued, reaching into his pocket and producing one of his remaining ration bars, the same type he'd shared with the juveniles. The familiar scent seemed to register. The ferocious mother's colors shifted slightly, aggression fading to caution. Ryan inched closer, still speaking in measured tones, until he was near enough to see the mechanism of the trap. It was designed for cruelty, serrated edges dug deeper with each struggle. Releasing it would require simultaneous pressure on two plates, while avoiding the powerful limbs of the wounded predator. Just as Ryan prepared to make his final approach, Neri appeared beside him, moving with such silence that even the ferocious seemed momentarily startled. "You will need assistance," she said, simply, her voice steady, despite the tremor visible in her luminescent markings. "I will help." Together they edged forward, Ryan maintaining eye contact with the predator, while Neri circled to approach the trap from the opposite side. The ferocious growled, but seemed to understand their intent particularly, as Ryan continued offering small pieces of food as distraction. "On my signal," Ryan instructed. 3, 2, 1 now." They pressed the release mechanism simultaneously. The trap sprung open with a metallic screech, freeing the wounded limb. The ferocious pulled back instantly, but rather than fleeing or attacking, she remained in place, examining her injury. The wound was deep, but not catastrophic. The predator would survive, though hunting might be difficult during recovery. Ryan slowly retrieved a medical sealant from his pack, designed for emergency field treatment. He offered it in an open palm, allowing the ferocious to inspect it before he motioned toward the wound. Incredibly, the massive predator extended her injured limb slightly, as if understanding. With extreme caution, Ryan applied the sealant, wincing in sympathy, as the creature rumbled in pain. The bioactive compound would accelerate healing and prevent infection. Basic treatment, but better than nothing. Task completed. Ryan and Neri backed away, giving the ferocious space to process the encounter. The predator watched them for a long moment, scales shifting through patterns Ryan couldn't interpret before disappearing into the forest with a grace that belied her injury. In the clearing's sudden emptiness, Ryan became acutely aware of what had just transpired. Beside him, Neri seemed equally affected, her luminescent patterns pulsing with strong emotion. "No one touches the ferocious," she said finally. "It is forbidden. Yet we have done so and live." "Does that mean something to your people?" Ryan asked. Neri nodded slowly. "The ancient texts speak of a time when the sacred hunters would recognize worthy souls from beyond our world. Most consider it allegory, not prophecy." She looked at him with new consideration. "The council will want to meet you." "Will that be dangerous for me?" A small smile touched Neri's lips for the first time. "Less dangerous than what we just did outside her." As they made their way back toward Ryan's camp, a new understanding formed between them. The shared experience had established a fragile trust, one Ryan was determined not to break. "Tell me about the poachers," he said. "Everything you know about their operation." Neri described a pattern of increasing exploitation, beginning with small expeditions that seemed harmless, escalating to the current, large-scale operation. The poachers used energy weapons to stun adult ferocious, leaving the juveniles vulnerable. Scales were harvested sometimes from living creatures and shipped off-world to black markets where regulations against endangered species products were loosely enforced. "We must stop them before the blessing ceremony," Neri concluded, as they reached Ryan's camp. "All ferocious families gather, then it would be slaughter." Ryan considered their options. Direct confrontation was suicidal. The poachers were better armed and more numerous. Alliance assistance was too distant. Local resistance seemed disorganized at best. "We need to make it too costly for them to continue," he said finally. "Sabotage rather than direct confrontation." Neri tilted her head, considering. The council would never approve such action. Would they need to know? A spark of something determination, perhaps, or rebellion flashed in Neri's eyes. No. Some duties supersede council mandates. They spent the remainder of the night planning. Ryan modified his emergency beacon to create localized EMPs, not powerful enough to permanently damage equipment, but sufficient to disrupt operations. Neri sketched maps of poacher movements, identifying vulnerabilities in their routines. By dawn, they had devised a strategy, systematic disruption, culminating in a final gambit that would use the poachers' fear against them. It was dangerous with numerous ways to fail catastrophically, but neither could accept inaction. As Neri prepared to return to her village, Ryan asked the question that had been bothering him. Why trust me so quickly? I'm an outsider. Neri's luminescent patterns shifted in what Ryan was beginning to recognize as thoughtfulness. The ferocious mother trusted you with her offspring. Such judgment carries weight beyond council wisdom. She paused. Also, your eyes do not hide your thoughts, as well as you believe. With that enigmatic statement, she vanished into the forest, leaving Ryan to prepare for their first act of resistance. The following days established a rhythm. Neri would arrive at nightfall, bringing information about poacher activities and occasionally supplies medicinal plants food that supplemented his dwindling rations, water vessels woven from materials that kept liquid cool despite the increasing daytime temperatures. Their sabotage began subtly. Ryan's modified EMPs disrupted scanner equipment, causing poachers to waste resources investigating false positives. Neri used her knowledge of the forest to misdirect hunting parties, leading them through areas where caustic plants damaged equipment and irritated exposed skin. Each small victory built confidence. Ryan learned to move through the forest with greater stealth, guided by Neri's patient instruction. She, in turn, became fascinated by his technology, particularly his analyzer and communication devices. Your people create remarkable tools, she observed on the third night examining his field tablet. Yet, they use them carelessly. Some do, Ryan acknowledged. The Alliance tries to balance progress with preservation, but it's an imperfect system. As is our council, Neri admitted. Tradition provides wisdom, but can blind us to necessary change. Their conversations deepened as trust grew. Ryan learned about Aurelian society, a complex structure built around forest guardianship, with seasonal migrations following sacred animal patterns. Neri absorbed information about the broader galactic community, asking penetrating questions about governance and cultural exchange. During daylight hours, Ryan continued his observations of the ferocious. The juveniles returned regularly, often accompanied by the mother he had helped. Her wound was healing well, the sealant having prevented infection. The predators appeared increasingly comfortable in his presence, allowing unprecedented observation of their social behaviors. On the fifth day, as Ryan was documenting a complex play behavior between juveniles, Neri arrived unexpectedly, her expression urgent. The poachers have adapted, she reported. They've tracked the equipment failures to this section of forest. They come with scanners. Ryan quickly secured his camp, disguising technological signatures as Neri had taught him. They retreated to higher ground, watching as a heavily armed patrol swept through the area where his pod had landed. The poachers were thorough, using advanced detection equipment that suggested financial backing beyond typical resource extractors. They located Ryan's impact site, but seemed confused by the absence of a vessel or survivor. They're looking for Alliance presence, Ryan realized. They know their operation violates regulations. Will they leave if they find you? More likely they'll eliminate evidence of their activities, Ryan said grimly, including witnesses. The patrol eventually moved on, but the message was clear. Their window for action was closing. The poachers were becoming more cautious, which made them more dangerous. That night, they accelerated their plans. Using components from Ryan's emergency beacon, they constructed rudimentary disruptors for the poachers' larger equipment. Under cover of darkness, they infiltrated the extraction camp, while the majority of personnel were engaged in night hunting. The security was lighter than expected overconfidence after months of unopposed operation. Ryan disabled perimeter sensors, while Neri moved with preternatural stealth to plant disruptors on key machinery. They sabotaged fuel lines, contaminated food stores with non-toxic but distinctly unpleasant substances, and most importantly, damaged the propulsion systems of the poachers' smaller scout vessels. As they were completing their work, claxons, suddenly blared across the camp. They'd been discovered not directly, but the automated systems had detected anomalies in the equipment. "Time to leave," Ryan hissed, already moving toward their predetermined escape route. They fled through the underbrush as searchlights activated behind them, illuminating the camp in harsh white glare. The sound of pursuit followed shouts and the distinctive whine of charging energy weapons. Neri led them through increasingly dense forest, following paths invisible to Ryan's eyes. The ferocious territories lay ahead dangerous, but their best hope for losing their pursuers. "The sacred hunters will attack anything that enters their domain with weapons," Neri explained as they ran. "The poachers know this, they will hesitate." It was a desperate gamble, but their options were limited. As they approached the territorial boundary, marked by distinctive claw markings on massive tree trunks, the sounds of pursuit grew closer. "They're gaining," Ryan panted, his human physiology struggling to match Neri's forest-adapted endurance. "We need only cross the boundary," she assured him. "Then we—" Her words cut off as energy discharge illuminated the forest behind them. A shot passed close enough for Ryan to feel its heat scoring a nearby tree trunk. "Halt!" a voice commanded in rough interstellar common. "Alliance spy!" Ryan pulled Neri behind a massive root structure as another shot blazed overhead. They were pinned down less than 50 meters from the ferocious territory, tantalizingly close to relative safety. "Go," Ryan urged Neri. "I'll draw their fire, then follow." She shook her head firmly. Together or not at all, outsider. Before Ryan could argue, a familiar roar resonated through the forest, deep, powerful, and unmistakably angry. The amber-scaled, ferocious mother emerged from the darkness ahead, flanked by two equally massive adults with scales shifting between combat red and stealth black. The poachers' advance halted abruptly. Energy weapons were formidable, but facing multiple adult ferocious in their territory was suicide even for well-armed hunters. What happened next would forever change Ryan's understanding of Aurelian life. The amber-scaled mother, the same creature he had freed from the trap, looked directly at him, then deliberately moved forward, positioning herself between the humans and Ryan and Neri's position. The other ferocious followed her lead, forming a living barrier. Behind them, juvenile heads peeked from undergrowth curiosity, overcoming caution. "Impossible," Neri whispered. "They protect us." The poachers began retreating, maintaining aim, but clearly unwilling to fire upon multiple apex predators. The ferocious advanced, steadily herding the intruders away from their territory and away from Ryan and Neri. When the sounds of retreat faded, the amber-scaled mother turned back toward their hiding place. Rather than departing, she approached directly, stopping a respectful distance away. Her posture was relaxed, scales shifted to calm blues and purples. Ryan slowly stood Neri, following with visible amazement. The ferocious mother made a rumbling sound, then turned slightly, looking back toward the heart of their territory, before returning her gaze to the pair. "I think," Ryan said slowly, "she wants us to follow." "Into sacred territory, voluntarily." Neri's voice held both fear and wonder. "Such an invitation is unprecedented. Do we accept?" Neri's luminescent markings pulsed with emotion. "To refuse would be the greater sacrilege, I think." They followed the ferocious mother deeper into her territory, surrounded by curious juveniles who darted about their feet with increasing boldness. The forest changed subtly here, the bioluminescence more intense, the vegetation patterns more organized, suggesting active management rather than wild growth. After nearly an hour's journey, they arrived at a breathtaking sight, a series of terraced pools carved into stone, their waters glowing with intense, blue-white light. Crystal formations lined the edges, refracting the luminescence into rainbow patterns that danced across the surrounding vegetation. The blessing pools, Neri breathed. No guardian has seen them directly for generations. We know them only from ancient texts. The adult ferocious gathered around the largest pool, their scales shifting to match its radiance. The juveniles approached the water cautiously, dipping limbs and making chirping sounds of apparent delight. The ceremony Neri mentioned, Ryan realized. This is where it happens. They watched in reverent silence as juveniles were guided into the glowing waters by their mothers. Each immersion seemed to intensify the natural bioluminescence of their scales, adding patterns that reminded Ryan of stellar constellations. "They're being marked," he observed. "Some kind of bioluminescent reaction with the water." "The sacred patterns," Neri confirmed. "They guide the hunters through darkness and identify family lineages." Her own luminescent markings seemed to respond to the ceremony, glowing more intensely in apparent sympathy. The amber-scaled mother approached them once more, nudging her offspring, Ryan's amber, toward the humans. The juvenile chirped excitedly, displaying newly acquired light patterns along its spine. What happened next would be recorded in both Alliance scientific archives and Aurelian sacred texts. The juvenile reached out with one small limb and touched Neri's hand, leaving a faint impression of its luminescent pattern on her skin. Neri gasped, her own markings flaring in response. The juvenile then turned to Ryan, repeating the gesture. Though less visible on his human skin, Ryan felt a distinct warmth. Where contact occurred, a sensation that spread gradually up his arm. "They've marked us," Neri whispered. "The blessing is usually reserved for new hunters coming of age." "What does it mean?" "Acceptance. Protection." She seemed overwhelmed by the implications. "The council must hear of this." Their observation of the sacred ceremony continued until dawn, when the ferocious families retreated to rest. The amber-scaled mother led Ryan and Neri to the territory's edge, seeing them safely beyond the boundary before returning to her offspring. As they made their way back toward Ryan's camp, exhausted but exhilarated, the forest was suddenly filled with a new sound, the distinctive hum of Alliance shuttlecraft. "They've found me," Ryan realized quickly, activating his emergency beacon to its full capacity. "My people have come." Within hours, Alliance Rangers had secured the area around Ryan's pod. The poacher's operation was discovered and shut down, with personnel detained and equipment confiscated. Captain Lenara, commanding the rescue vessel, debriefed Ryan thoroughly on his experiences. Unauthorized first contact interference with local development and vigilante action against resource extractors," she summarized. "Technically speaking, Commander, you've violated at least 7 regulations." "Yes, Captain," Ryan acknowledged. "However," Lenara continued with a slight smile, "your actions have also provided unprecedented xenobiological data and prevented ecological devastation of a protected world. The Alliance Science Directorate is already calling it the most significant breakthrough in predator-sentient relations in decades." Neri had been invited aboard the Alliance vessel as a formal representative of her people, an honor that both terrified and fascinated her. The ship's environment was overwhelmingly alien, yet the respectful treatment she received eased her initial apprehension. Chief Thorin and the Elders' Council, informed of the unprecedented events, requested formal dialogue with Alliance representatives. The sacred marking of outsiders by ferocious hunters had profound religious implications that overrode traditional isolation policies. 3 days after the rescue, a formal gathering was held at the edge of the forest. Alliance personnel established a temporary diplomatic outpost, while Aurelian representatives arrayed themselves according to ancient protocols. The ferocious families observed from a respectful distance, their presence unprecedented at such gatherings. Chief Thorin, an elderly Aurelian with elaborate platinum decorations woven into his braids, addressed the assembled group. "For generations we have kept ourselves apart from the stars, believing isolation preserved our sacred ways. The events of recent days suggest another path." Captain Lenara responded with equal formality. The Alliance respects your autonomy and traditions. We seek understanding, not assimilation. The diplomatic exchange continued for hours, establishing preliminary protocols for limited cultural and scientific exchange. Throughout the proceedings, Ryan noticed Neri's attention repeatedly drawn to the forest edge, where amber scales occasionally gleamed between violet foliage. As twilight approached, Chief Thorin raised a hand for silence. There is one matter of profound significance to address. The sacred hunters have blessed two souls, one of our own, one from beyond. Such a union transcends ordinary diplomatic consideration. All eyes turned to Ryan and Neri, standing together, yet apart representatives of their respective worlds. Lieutenant Commander Blackwood, Captain Lenara, addressed him formally. The Alliance Science Directorate has authorized a permanent research outpost on Aurelius contingent on local approval. They've requested you specifically to lead it, given your unique rapport with the indigenous wildlife. Ryan looked at Neri, whose luminescent patterns betrayed her anticipation, despite her carefully neutral expression. I would be honored to serve in that capacity, he replied, with the Council's blessing. Chief Thorin nodded slowly. Guardian Neri has been nominated as liaison between our peoples, should she accept this duty. Neri's markings flared briefly, before settling into determined patterns. I accept the responsibility with gratitude for the Council's trust. As the formal proceedings concluded, and the gathering dispersed, Ryan and Neri found themselves momentarily alone beside the forest boundary. The familiar chirp of juvenile ferocious sounded from nearby undergrowth. Your people will establish their outpost here, Neri asked. Yes, but with strict limitations. Observation only minimal personnel, all activities approved by your council. She nodded satisfaction, evident in her posture. And you will remain as liaison. I've requested permanent assignment, Ryan confirmed. There's so much to learn about your world, about the ferocious especially. About Aurelians as well, perhaps. There was something tentative in her question, a vulnerability Ryan hadn't previously detected. Especially about Aurelians, he agreed, holding her gaze. One in particular. The luminescent patterns on Neri's skin shifted to configurations Ryan hadn't seen before, warm colors that seemed to pulse in rhythm with her heartbeat. She reached forward, slowly, placing her palm against his chest in what he recognized as a significant cultural gesture. In our tradition, those who share the sacred marking are bound by destiny, she explained softly. Not merely as allies, but as something deeper. Ryan covered her hand with his own. On Earth, we have similar beliefs about fate bringing people together across impossible distances. Their conversation was interrupted by the familiar, amber-scaled, ferocious mother emerging from the forest with deliberate calm. Her offspring followed, including Ryan's, named Juvenile, now displaying more elaborate luminescent patterns after the blessing ceremony. The mother approached the pair without hesitation, scales shifting through patterns that even Neri seemed to find remarkable. She circled them once, then settled nearby, her posture suggesting protective watchfulness rather than threat. She considers us under her protection now, Neri translated with wonder. Such behavior is known only in legend. In the days that followed, Alliance personnel established their research outpost with careful respect for Aurelian customs. The poachers' operation was dismantled entirely, its participants facing serious charges under interstellar conservation law. More importantly, the sector was designated for enhanced monitoring, preventing similar exploitation attempts. Ryan's role evolved beyond scientific observation. As the first human to establish meaningful contact with both Aurelians and ferocious predators, he became a crucial bridge between worlds. His reports to the Alliance Science Directorate revolutionized understanding of interspecies communication and challenged long-held assumptions about predator intelligence. Neri similarly transformed her society's approach to outsiders. Her first-hand experience with Alliance technology and philosophy allowed her to advocate for selective adoption of beneficial practices while preserving Aurelian traditions. The council, initially skeptical, came to value her balanced perspective. Their personal relationship developed with similar care, a gradual exploration of commonalities and differences building understanding across biological and cultural divides. The sacred marking they shared created a unique bond recognized and respected by both societies. One evening, 6 months after Ryan's arrival on Aurelis, he and Neri stood on the observation platform of the newly constructed research center. Below them, the forest pulsed with bioluminescent life, while above the amber sky darkened to reveal unfamiliar constellations. Dr. Evelyn reports the ferocious communication patterns show definite syntactic structure. Ryan noted, reviewing data from the day's observations. They're not just signaling, they're conversing. Our ancestors understood this, Neri replied, her fingers intertwined with his. The sacred texts described the hunters as messengers between worlds. Their peaceful contemplation was interrupted by familiar chirping as juvenile Ferocious scaled the platform's support beams with ease. Amber, now nearly adolescent in size, had developed a habit of seeking them out during evening hours, often bringing trinkets from the forest. Unusual stones, luminescent plants once, even a functioning piece of poacher technology. Tonight, the juvenile presented something different. A smooth oval stone that glowed with internal light, shifting between colors in patterns similar to Aurelian markings. A heartstone, Neri breathed, accepting the gift with reverence. They form only at the deepest levels of the blessing pools, where ancient minerals react with living energy. The stone pulsed between them, its colors synchronizing with both Neri's natural markings and the faint pattern still visible on Ryan's arm from the blessing ceremony. "What does this mean?" Ryan asked, though something in him already understood the significance. Neri's expression combined joy with solemnity. "Among my people, when a heartstone is offered, it represents the deepest possible bond, a joining of souls that transcends ordinary union." Ryan covered her hands with his own, encompassing the glowing stone between them. "On Earth, we would call that marriage. Is that something you would consider a formal union recognized by both our peoples?" Instead of answering immediately, Ryan reached into his pocket and withdrew a small object he'd been carrying for weeks. A ring crafted by Alliance artisans, using metal from his escape pod and luminescent resin from Aurelian forests. "I've been waiting for the right moment," he admitted. "It seems the Ferocious have better timing than I do." Their union ceremony, held at the boundary between forest and outpost, incorporated traditions from both worlds. Alliance personnel stood alongside Aurelian villagers, while Ferocious families observed from respectful distances, a gathering unprecedented in either society's records. Chief Thorin officiated his elaborate ceremonial markings, glowing brilliantly against the twilight forest. Today, we witness not merely the joining of two individuals, but the forging of a path between worlds. The sacred hunters have blessed this union, marking these souls as bridge builders. Captain Lenara, representing the Alliance, added, "We recognize and honor this bond, not just as a personal commitment, but as a symbol of the understanding we strive to build between diverse civilizations." The heartstone, mounted in a ceremonial setting that allowed it to be worn against Neri's skin, pulsed in rhythm with the luminescent patterns shared by the couple. As they completed their vows, Neri, speaking in both Aurelian and common language, Ryan doing his best to pronounce the ritual phrases in her native tongue, the assembled Ferocious raised their voices in harmonized calls that resonated through the forest. Later, as celebration continued around them, Ryan and Neri stood at the edge of the gathering watching as Alliance scientists cautiously shared knowledge with Aurelian elders, while juvenile Ferocious investigated the strange new humans with typical curiosity. "What happens now?" Neri asked her, head resting against Ryan's shoulder. Ryan considered the future unfolding before them, challenges certainly, but also unprecedented opportunities for growth and understanding. "We build something new," he answered simply. "Not just research outposts or diplomatic protocols, but a genuine bridge between worlds." The amber-scaled, Ferocious mother approached her offspring, following in organized formation. She stopped before the couple, her scales shifting through patterns that Ryan had learned to recognize as formal recognition. Then, with deliberate gentleness, she extended one massive limb to touch Neri's abdomen, where the faintest glow had begun to manifest beneath her skin. Neri gasped softly, her free hand moving to cover the spot. "How did she know? I only confirmed it yesterday." Ryan's expression shifted from confusion to wonder as understanding dawned. We're... Yes, Neri confirmed, luminescent patterns betraying her joy. "The first child of both worlds. Our geneticists say it is possible, difficult, but possible." The ferocious mother rumbled approval, her scales displaying patterns associated with protection and family bonds. Around them, the forest seemed to pulse with heightened luminescence, as if the entire ecosystem celebrated this new beginning. As twilight deepened into night, campfires illuminated the gathering, while bioluminescent plants added their ethereal glow. Aurelians demonstrated traditional dances, while Alliance personnel shared music from distant worlds. Above them all, ferocious predators perched in trees or prowled peaceful perimeters, their sacred role as guardians extending now to this fragile new alliance. On the edge of firelight, Ryan and Neri stood together, hands intertwined, the heartstone pulsing between them in rhythm with the new life growing within. Before them stretched not just personal happiness, but a future where understanding bridged the vast distances between stars. The journey will not be easy. Neri acknowledged, watching as an Alliance scientist cautiously offered food to a curious juvenile, ferocious under the watchful eye of its mother. "The important ones never are," Ryan agreed. "But we've already overcome the greatest barrier." "Trust," Neri said simply, her free hand resting protectively over her abdomen. Ryan nodded, thinking of that first night when a curious predator had chosen approach over attack, and a hidden observer had chosen understanding over fear. From those small beginnings, worlds had shifted, and a new path had emerged through the stars. Around them, the forest of Aurelis pulsed with ancient light, while overhead, the first communication relay satellite, jointly designed by Alliance and Aurelian engineers, established connection with the broader galactic community. The future beckoned luminous with possibility, as apex predators sang welcome to the night.